With only 6 episodes released so far, X-Men 97 has already claimed its rightful place among the greatest animated series of all time. However, we have still not been introduced to one of the most enigmatic villains of all time, Apocalypse. Since he was a prominent antagonist of the original series, it would not make sense for him to not appear in X-Men 97. That's why in today's video, we will be talking about the entire story of Apocalypse from X-Men, the animated series, to prime you before he appears in X-Men 97. But before we get started with the video, we have a small request for you. If you like our content, subscribe to us and like this video. It might be just a simple click for you, but it means a lot to us. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started.
Dare challenge Apocalypse again?
Apocalypse's debut in X-Men, the animated series. Apocalypse, or En Sabanur, is considered the first mutant to ever exist. His origins in the X-Men the animated series were never explained, but it's possible that he had the same origin story as his comic book counterpart because, during his early reign, he was the ruler of ancient Egypt. Even during that time, he had already created his first horseman and was in possession of highly advanced technology, with the help of which he created the Lazarus Chamber. The Lazarus Chamber was a restorative device capable of granting immortality to an individual by rejuvenating his body. With the help of this device, Apocalypse kept himself alive for millennials, but his immortality came with a cost. The user needed to go into hibernation every 100 years, or their body would perish. Not much is known about Apocalypse in his early reign, but when he woke up during the later 20th century, he found himself in a world teeming with powerful mutants, but at the same time, the world had become weak. Thus, he embarked on a mission to obliterate the world as we know it, and rebuild it in accordance with his vision. To achieve his goal, he recruited Mystique and made her replace Dr. Adler, the person responsible for the creation of mutant power dampening collar, with funding from Warren Worthington, the human angel. Adler started working on a device to cure the mutants of their mutations and make them normal. He soon gained popularity for his claims, and a lot of mutants started visiting him to get themselves cured. However, the device was not capable of curing their mutation. Instead, it was a device that would actually brainwash them and make them slaves of Apocalypse. The first to fall for this scam was Rogue, who traveled to Mir Island to meet Dr. Adler and get the cure. But Dr. Adler asked her to leave and come in an hour, and he'll have an answer for her. After Rogue leaves, Mystique is greeted by Apocalypse, who heard her conversation with Rogue and told her to use the machine to turn Rogue into his slave because she is an extremely powerful mutant and they can use her abilities well. However, before Rogue can undergo the treatment, Pyro and Avalanche kidnap Dr. Adler, but to their surprise, they discover that Adler is actually Mystique. Meanwhile, Cable was in the present looking for Adler because he created the mutant dampening collar and put his future in peril. In the meantime, discovering that Adler has gone missing, Professor X calls the X-Men and asks them to save the Doctor. However, when the X-Men reach Adler, they find Cable trying to kill him, and not knowing Cable's real intention, they fight him to make sure Adler is safe. During the fight, Rogue realizes that her powers are a blessing in disguise and does not go through the procedure. However, Adler was greeted by Warren Worthington, who also wanted to get rid of his mutant powers. Thus, Adler goes to meet Apocalypse and reveals that he found another mutant to be his slave, and Apocalypse is overjoyed as his plans have finally been set into motion. Soon, Warren goes through a transformation process, but instead of losing his mutant power, he gets brainwashed by Apocalypse and transforms into Archangel, the Horseman of Death. To recruit more slaves for Apocalypse, Mystique impersonates Warren and spreads the news that Adler's treatment is working. Intrigued by Mystique's words, some mutants who were unhappy with their powers agree to go through the treatment and are transformed into the other 3 horsemen of Apocalypse: Pestilence, War, and Famine. After assembling his horsemen, Apocalypse sets his plan in motion and makes them attack a peaceful conference being held in Paris regarding the future of mutant kind. Thus, the humans unleashed their military, but the horsemen easily took down the human army, prompting Professor X to send the X-Men to stop his madness. However, he does not send Rogue with the other X-Men and gives her a solo mission to go to Mir Island and investigate Dr. Adler, because all the mutants assisting Apocalypse were last seen in Mir Island looking for Adler's cure. Thus, Rogue goes to Adler's lab and uncovers that it was Mystique who had been impersonating Adler all along. After Rogue coerces Mystique, she reveals the truth that there is no cure. The device was created by Apocalypse to create an army of brainwashed soldiers who'd embody his beliefs and help him recreate the world in his image. Mystique also reveals that Apocalypse has a secret base in Stonehenge, England. Thus, armed with this newfound knowledge, Rogue rushes to Stonehenge to stop the tyrant once and for all. Meanwhile, on the other side, the X-Men took care of the Horsemen, and when they found themselves losing, they ran away from the site. Watching the Horsemen flee, Cable asked his team to chase after them, as they might lead them to Apocalypse's lair. Around the same time, Rogue reaches Stonehenge and takes on Apocalypse all by herself. However, soon enough, the Horsemen arrived and revealed that they lost to the X-Men. Apocalypse was in denial that he had lost, but the X-Men arrived on the site, giving Apocalypse a reality check. Enraged, Apocalypse releases his horsemen on the mutants, and this time, they come close to defeating the X-Men with the help of Archangel. Thus, Rogue intervenes by using her powers on Archangel and returning him back to his senses. With Archangel's help, the X-Men finally took down the Horsemen, and they made a run for it. Embarrassed with his defeat, Apocalypse calls his horsemen weak and also runs away from the site along with his advanced spaceship. Later, during the events of the Days of Future Past, Apocalypse orders Mystique to assassinate Senator Kelly, which leads to a snowball effect that ends in the death of countless mutants. However, Bishop comes to the past from the future and stops the assassination, saving the future of the X-Men. Wolf in sheep's clothing. Apocalypse's manipulation. Later, Apocalypse returns in the second season, and this time with a new scheme, the Technovirus. Assuming the guise of a human scientist, he allied himself with Graydon Creed, aiming to create mass hysteria and fear among humans regarding mutant. Progressing towards his goal, Apocalypse's actions incited widespread anti-mutant sentiment, with mutants unjustly blamed as carriers of the supposed plague. Thus, Bishop returns to the present and tries to stop the virus from spreading. He meets the X-Men and reveals that when he returned to the future after saving Kelly, the future was changed because of an engineered virus that infected both humans and mutants alike and resulted in the death of the X-Men. The Beast also supports his claims, revealing that the virus was indeed engineered and is highly unstable. He reveals that it isn't harmful now because only humans are affected by the virus, but when it comes in contact with the mutants, it will become deadly for both humans and mutants alike. Thus, they contacted President Kelly, and he organized for the Beast to appear in a Senate committee hearing to talk about the current health crisis. Meanwhile, Graydon Creed also appears in the hearing, with the plan of infecting Beast at the very site, proving that mutants are indeed the plague carriers. However, his plans were foiled by Bishop, who noticed Creed carrying a weapon to infect Beast with the virus. So instead of infecting Beast, the weapon accidentally triggered, and Creed ends up infecting himself with the virus. In pain, Creed runs to his lair to ask his scientist friend to help him get rid of the virus. Meanwhile, the X-Men deduce that Creed is behind the engineered virus and go to his lab to confront him. Once inside the lab, the X-Men are met with a startling revelation that Creed's scientist friend is none other than Apocalypse. Thus, a fierce battle between the X-Men and Apocalypse breaks out, and during the battle, the X-Men manage to destroy Apocalypse's virus and made their way out of the mansion. Enraged at the X-Men for destroying his virus, Apocalypse grows in size and obliterates the X-Men. Meanwhile, all of this was being witnessed by Cable through his computer, since he hailed from a future that required the technovirus to infect people in the past for the creation of essential antibodies to stop the virus. Bishop's intervention started disintegrating his timeline. To preserve his timeline, he also traveled to the time when Bishop landed in the present to stop the virus. He confronts Bishop and tries to convince him that the creation of the virus is necessary for the survival of his timeline. But Bishop is adamant about destroying the virus and runs away from Cable. All the events unfolded as they had before, but during the Senate hearing, when Bishop stops Creed, Cable also comes to the site and kidnaps Wolverine. When the X-Men follow Creed to his headquarters, Cable also arrives on the site with Wolverine with a new plan to create antibodies for the survival of his future. The fight with Apocalypse unfolds as it happened earlier, but this time, Cable allows Wolverine to get infected with the virus. However, instead of succumbing to the virus, Wolverine's healing factor creates antibodies in his body and saves him. These antibodies were essential for the future as they will continue to save countless mutants and restore the timeline. After saving the timeline and the X-Men, Cable returns to his future, revealing that his children are indeed alive, and he successfully restored the timeline.
Return to me, O sweet death, my horseman, and all shall be forgiven.
Forgiven?
Deception and desperation and obsession. Apocalypse returns again in the third season of X-Men, the animated series, in an episode titled Obsession. Following Apocalypse's manipulation of Warren, the latter becomes consumed with the singular goal of eliminating the evil tyrant once and for all. Despite exhaustive research, Warren discovers the grim truth that Apocalypse was immortal and couldn't be destroyed. However, one of his subordinates came up with a scroll revealing that Apocalypse had a weakness in the back of his neck. Armed with his newfound knowledge, Warren sets out for New York Harbor, where Apocalypse has recently been sighted. After witnessing Warren, Apocalypse offers him to come back as his horseman, but Warren rejects his offer and decides to end his life. In the meantime, the X-Men also arrived on the site to aid him. Together, they engage in a fierce battle, but before they can deliver a decisive blow, Apocalypse escaped, leaving Warren gravely wounded. Thus, the X-Men took Warren to their lair and waited for him to recover. Meanwhile, Beast learns about Apocalypse's sentient spaceship and decides to visit it. Upon regaining consciousness, Warren enlists Rogue to assist him in his quest to defeat Apocalypse once and for all. Meantime, the X-Men made their way to the sentient ship, where Beast befriended the ship's sentience because of his intelligence. With the help of the ship, he created a prison for Apocalypse that would keep him trapped forever. However, However, around the same time, Apocalypse arrives on the ship. After battling Rogue and Archangel, he tries to intimidate the X-Men, but Beast manages to imprison him in the prison that they created just now. However, driven by his vengeance, Warren destroys the prison to kill Apocalypse with his own hand. After being unleashed, Apocalypse reveals that he had no weakness and orchestrated all of these events to exploit Warren's vulnerability and regain control. This enraged Warren, and he launched a brutal counterattack on Apocalypse, along with the other X-Men. Despite their combined effort, they found themselves outmatched by Apocalypse's overwhelming power. Thus, the sentient ship intervened, imprisoning Apocalypse in a pod and sacrificing itself to dispatch him into the depths of space. After defeating Apocalypse, the ship's sentience finally meets its demise, and Beast mourns the loss of his new friend. However, Apocalypse was only exiled to space and would soon return to Earth for one final evil scheme. Apocalypse sees an opportunity in Sanctuary, just as predicted by the ship's consciousness. Apocalypse indeed survived his ordeal and met with the Shi'ar Princess Deathbird, since Deathbird was already looking for a way to remove the Laundra from the throne of Shi'ar and become the Magistrix herself. When Apocalypse claimed that he could help her achieve her dream in return for servitude, she instantly agreed to his request. Later, during the Sanctuary storyline, Fabian Cortez betrays Magneto and tries to assassinate him so that he can rule over Asteroid M himself. However, Magneto survives and makes his way to Asteroid M to confront Cortez. As Asteroid M collapses, Magneto imprisons Fabian Cortez on the planet, intending to end his life for his betrayal. However, Fabian is saved by Apocalypse, who tasks him with traveling to Earth and recruiting soldiers for his cause.
Once, but now nothing can stop the apocalypse.
Scott!
Apocalypse's escalation end beyond good and evil. After being defeated again and again by the X-Men, Apocalypse decides to seek out the only power that can help him defeat the mutants once and for all: the power to manipulate time itself. In 3999 AD, Cable and his team made a plan to ambush Apocalypse's Sphinx in Cairo while he was rejuvenating in his Lazarus chamber. Cable's plan was to destroy Apocalypse's Lazarus chamber, effectively ending his life. However, he was unaware that he was running into a trap set by the Master Manipulator. Once inside the Sphinx, Cable managed to destroy Apocalypse's Lazarus chamber, but Apocalypse got his hand on Cable's computer and gained the ability to travel in time. This means he can effectively travel to the past and access his Lazarus chamber to rejuvenate himself. With newfound control over temporal forces, Apocalypse establishes a stronghold in the axis of time, and since he was an extremely powerful being traveling through time, he unknowingly offsets Bishop's time travel, trapping him in the axis of time. Meanwhile, in the present, the X-Men are celebrating the marriage of Jean and Cyclops. But their happiness does not last long, because moments after their marriage, Jean Grey is kidnapped by the Nasty Boy. Later, while Professor X is searching for Jean's whereabouts with the help of his Cerebro, Sinister arrives on the site and tries to kidnap the Professor. However, Shard arrives in the nick of time and stops Sinister from kidnapping Professor X. Meanwhile, Jean Grey, who was trapped inside Sinister's prison, learns that Apocalypse was responsible for her abduction. Elsewhere, Apocalypse aids Deathbird's rebellion against Lalandra, only to betray Deathbird and abduct Oracle, a member of the Imperial Guard. Suspecting that something is wrong, Lalandra alerts Professor X telepathically. Upon learning this information, Professor X connects the dots and deduces that Apocalypse is trying to kidnap all the mutants with telepathic ability. Although they were unsure why Apocalypse was doing it, they needed to stop him before it was too late. Thus, the Professor divides the X-Men into teams of 2 and stations them on guard for different psychics. Wolverine and Shard are stationed to protect Psylocke from getting kidnapped, but they find out that Archangel is following Psylocke. Since they are unsure whose side Archangel is on, Wolverine goes to investigate. Soon enough, Sabretooth and Mystique, who had been working for Apocalypse, arrive on the site to kidnap Psylocke. However, Wolverine and Shard manage to save her in the nick of time, but their victory was short-lived as Magneto arrived and abducted Psylocke, revealing that he was also working for Apocalypse. Meanwhile, in Apocalypse's lair, it is revealed that Magneto is working for Apocalypse because he promised that he'd resurrect Magneto's wife after they finish collecting the psychic. Around the same time, Sinister arrives on the site and reveals that the X-Men have discovered the pattern of their attack. However, Apocalypse is not worried because he is sure that the one who commands time will win in the end. Meanwhile, in the future, Cable finds another way to travel through time and destroy Apocalypse's Lazarus chamber right after its creation. However, his new time machine is intercepted by Apocalypse, which lands him in the present while the X-Men are dealing with the abduction of the psychic. Cable was also baffled by how he ended up here and told the X-Men everything that had happened in the future and how he had landed it. The X-Men realized that their interest and Cable's interests aligned. Thus, they followed his lead and traveled to 1200 BC to destroy Apocalypse, just after the creation of his first pyramid. All of this is witnessed by Apocalypse from the shadows, revealing that the X-Men are going to fall right into his trap. After arriving in Cairo, they seek the perfect opportunity to attack Apocalypse. but find resistance from his horsemen. While some X-Men hold off the horsemen, Cyclops asks Professor to take Beast, Wolverine, and Cable with him inside the Sphinx and end Apocalypse's terrain once and for all. To save Apocalypse's chamber, the horsemen desert the fight and run into the Sphinx to stop Professor X and his team. After fighting all the horsemen, the X-Men finally enter Apocalypse's Lazarus chamber, only to find that Apocalypse inside the chamber is Mystique. And this was all an elaborative plan by Apocalypse to capture the final psychic, Professor X. After assembling all the psychics in one place, Apocalypse starts his procedure and explains his real plan to Magneto. He reveals that if someone kills all the powerful psychics of the universe at the same time, then they will release a psychic energy blast powerful enough to stop time itself. And if time is destroyed, everything in existence will also come to an end, except for whatever exists outside of time, like his fortress in the axis of time. After the end of the universe, he would create the universe anew in his own vision and would finally rule over it without any opposition. After learning about Apocalypse's horrific plan, Magneto and Mystique decide to betray him to stop this madness. In the fight that ensued, Magneto defeated Apocalypse, threw him out of the axis of time, but Apocalypse was saved by his horsemen and ordered Sinister to destroy Magneto and Mystique. The duo tried to fight the horsemen and Sinister's army together, but found themselves losing. So they enlisted Wolverine to help them save all the psychic. Even with Wolverine's help, they failed to defeat Apocalypse, and he kickstarted the process of draining the life force of the psychic. However, Bishop, who was also in the axis of time, noticed this and started attacking the ring to save the psychic. After losing some psychics, Apocalypse's plan starts unraveling. Everything that was lost to time starts getting restored. Thus, Apocalypse deduces that someone else is also out there in the axis of time and goes to confront Bishop, claims that he won't let one man ruin his 1,000 years of hard work, and launches his horsemen upon Bishop. Meanwhile, inside Apocalypse's chamber, Wolverine attacks Sinister, and he accidentally destroys the orb that controls the psychic, which restores time as it was and releases the psychics from their captivity. Thus, Apocalypse returns to his fortress to confront Cable and Wolverine, and the battle that ensued destroyed the entire fortress along with Apocalypse's dream. Even after all this destruction, Apocalypse is unwilling to give up and decides to use his mastery over time to suck away Magneto's power, but he gets intercepted by Professor X and all the psychics who were released from his captivity. The collective powers of the psychics transported everyone from the axis of time alongside Apocalypse, and since his Lazarus chamber was destroyed in 1200 BC, he would simply cease to exist outside the axis of time. After finally defeating Apocalypse, the X-Men rejoice in their win, unaware that Apocalypse is not completely dead and will return again. Not quite the end. Apocalypse's fate in the X-Men animated series. Unbeknownst to Cable or the X-Men, Apocalypse created a duplicate Lazarus chamber, guarded by a Mayan tribe, as a contingency plan in case all of his plans failed in the end. When Apocalypse rescued Fabian Cortez from Asteroid M, he gave him powers to augment any mutant's power, making him even more powerful. With this newfound power, Cortez was tasked with amassing an army of mutants to serve Apocalypse's grand design. With his Lazarus chamber destroyed in 1200 BC, Apocalypse's essence survived, awaiting a celestial alignment to transfer his essence into a suitable host body. Hence, he assigned Cortez the mission of finding a worthy vessel for his resurrection. But even with the Hound, Fabian was unable to secure a vessel. However, fortune favored him when one day, Jubilee and the Beast stumbled upon the tribe's location. Thus, the Hounds captured them and brought them to Fabian, who used his powers to transform Beast into a feral being, and Hank ran away from the site. The preparations to use Jubilee as the vessel started, and she was put on the altar. However, when the feral version of Hank came across a picture of him with the X-Men, he came back to his senses and rushed back to the temple to save Jubilee. Hank arrived in the nick of time and vanquished all the Hounds to save Jubilee. One of the Hounds, Caliban, also helped Jubilee, and together they ran out of the collapsing temple. Since Fabian has lost the vessel and it is time for Apocalypse to descend to Earth, he asks him to forgive his mistake, but Apocalypse was not angry and claimed that he indeed provided him with the vessel. Apocalypse proceeded to occupy Fabian's body to resurrect himself and rule over the world once again. Marvelous verdict. If you are following the episodes of the X-Men 97 animated series, then we are sure you might have already noticed how Marvel just casually dropped one of the biggest Easter eggs about Apocalypse in the intro of the 6th episode. Heck, it wasn't an Easter egg. It was a full-blown sign that Apocalypse is going to appear in the upcoming episode. But how are the creators going to intertwine Apocalypse into the greater story? Well, since they have already pulled off all the amazing stories so far, we believe they will do justice to Apocalypse too. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for Apocalypse's return, with 10 being the highest? With that being said, if you like our content, like it and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.